Welcome to our second edition of our new podcast series, Tāwara o Te Wai, Water Talk. I'm Mumtaz Parker, Water New Zealand's Training and Development Manager. In this episode, we're talking about Te Mana o Te Wai. That's a term that most of us in the water sector will have heard of. It's now enshrined in legislation, from how we are to regulate drinking water through to managing fresh water and its environment. Te Mana o Te Wai refers to the vital importance of water, that the health and well-being of the water is paramount because without healthy water, we won't have a healthy environment or healthy people. It also acknowledges that tangata whenua carry important mātauranga Māori or traditional knowledge built up over generations through a deep understanding of the environment, and that in order to give effect to Te Mana o Te Wai, we must actively engage with iwi. But what exactly does all this mean? And will it really have a big impact on the way those of us in the water sector work? And more importantly, will it achieve what it sets out to do? Ensure healthy, safe water, which in turn makes for a healthy environment and healthy people. I'm joined by two of our members who have been giving Te Mana o Te Wai plenty of thought in recent years. Troy Brockbank is a water practitioner and civil engineer. He was Water New Zealand's Young Water Professional of the Year in 2018, and his whakapapa is from Te Rarawa, Ngāti Hine, and Ngāpuhi. Also joining us is our president, Helen Atkins. Helen is an environmental lawyer with a strong interest in the legislative framework around water policy. Tēnā kōrua. So, Helen, could I start by asking where and how the concept of Te Mana o Te Wai found its way into legislation?
Kia ora, Mumtaz. So the concept, and it's a construct really, and Troy might want to talk a bit more about that when he takes us through the principles a bit later, that it's a created construct, but the first place it really started to appear was in 2014. So the concept was included in the 2014 version of the National Policy Statement on Freshwater Management. It arose because there was consultation on the reforms that the government was looking to undertake the year before, so in 2013, and it was certainly on the table as something that needed to be included in those water reforms. The 2014 change to the NPSFM, not just the Te Mana o Te Wai aspect, but all the changes that were made, were seen as setting a new direction for water protection to allow the principles of the treaty to be taken into account in managing freshwater quality and quantity, as well as articulating tangata whenua values. When we look back to that time, in hindsight, it really didn't go far enough. And things that happened after 2014 were testament to that. So then in 2017, we had further reforms as a result of Crown collaboration with the Freshwater Iwi Leaders Group and the co-design of reform options that went on from 2014 to 2017. So these revisions to the NPS, which occurred in 2017, further entrenched Te Mana o Te Wai in greater detail. And they included a standalone statement recognising the importance of Te Mana o Te Wai at the beginning of the National Policy Statement. In addition, Te Mana o Te Wai was also included as a primary objective in the NPSFM, which stated that it was to be considered and recognised in the management of freshwater. And at that time, regional councils were required to make changes to their regional policy statements and any regional plans to consider and recognise Te Mana o Te Wai. I'll talk a little bit more later about where we're at in the real world in relation to that recognition. Then in 2020, we had following the 2019 Waitangi Tribunal report on the National Freshwater and Geothermal Resources Claim, further consideration was given in detail by the tribunal regarding the right to control access to and the use of water in rohi, and how that should be recognised in modern circumstances. The tribunal found that the Resource Management Act and the freshwater management regime is not compliant with the treaty. And this in part led to some of the changes that were made to the National Policy Statement in 2020. So in September 2020, we had a new National Policy Statement which replaced the 2014/2017 version. So we've had lots of iterations. So in that 2020 version, which is the version that's now in force and must be given effect to, Te Mana o Te Wai is recognised as a fundamental concept. There are 6 principles set out in the document, and Troy will talk about them shortly. There is a hierarchy of obligations that has been set out, and again, we'll talk about them shortly. In addition, there are requirements in the document setting out the way in which local authorities must implement the National Policy Statement, particularly in giving effect to Te Mana o Te Wai. So they have the kinds of obligations you generally see associated with treaty requirements, and these include consultation, active involvement or engagement with tangata whenua, the requirement to put in place that hierarchy of obligations, which we'll talk about shortly, the application of a diversity of values and knowledge in relation to freshwater management, the adoption of an integrated approach to such management, and also a requirement that regional councils include an objective in their regional policy statements describing how Te Mana o Te Wai will be given effect to. So although the provision that we're talking about has only been in the NPS since September 2020 and planning processes are very slow, we are starting to see some meaningful conversations taking place about that concept and what it means on the ground.
Yeah, it's great to see how it's evolved over the last 8 years, and that brings me to, Troy, if I could, move on to you as an engineer with a strong interest in Te Mana o Te Wai. What does this mean to you?
Well, firstly, ngā mihi Mumtaz, and kia koe hoki, Helen, for this podcast today. To me, it's the first concept or and framework and hierarchy that I've seen as an engineer that really attempts to further bridge the gap between a te ao Māori view and what some may call a more Western view. In fact, it's a concept that really is quite holistic. We've heard from Helen on the history of where it's kind of formed, but it even predates that. If you look at it from a te ao Māori lens, it's kind of a narrative, a concept, a value system that's been handed down through the many generations from the atua above to the people living to today. Those who are the kaitiaki on the land and those who are the kaimanaki and kaitautoko that support this amazing kaupapa. Te Mana o Te Wai is obviously not just a te ao Māori concept alone. It is really an integrated concept, and I think that's why many of us hold it in really high regard, because like I said, it is really that first concept in the engineering, the water industry realms, which have attempted to kind of bridge that gap, and it's done in such a amazing way. But to me, Te Mana o Te Wai really is around, giving that respect back to water. What it means is that, we're not just doing designs from an engineering perspective anymore. We're actually taking water and putting it at the heart of those designs. So we're no longer looking at this in a stormwater sense, building a site and discharging water. we're actually going, right, what's the receiving environment? We must protect that at all costs. We're going to put that really at the heart of our design now and do whatever we can that's physically possible within the realms of our project to ensure that that waterway is healthy. That waterway has mauri that's been enhanced, and ensuring that the people around it are healthy. Through Te Mana o Te Wai, we are engaging more with our communities, and tangata whenua are also included within this ultimate holistic concept of Te Mana o Te Wai. To really play a part or even be a part, be at the table of making decisions for water bodies in the region. And the stem from that is us in the three waters industry and all the effects that come with that in protecting water.
Kia ora, Troy. You mentioned bridging the gap between the Te Ao Māori worldview and the Western worldview. How do the 6 principles of Te Mana o Te Wai support the concept?
Yeah, well, if you look at these 6 principles, you've got mana whakahaere, kaitiakitanga, manaakitanga, governance, stewardship, and care and respect. Those are the 6 principles in the National Policy Statement 2020 for freshwater management, around Te Mana o Te Wai. But really, if you look at them in more detail, there's really 3 sets of pairs in these principles. One being written, well, the principles themselves tend to be written in a Tiriti Waitangi Treaty of Waitangi framework, where you've got a Tiriti of, you've got a tangata whenua approach or lens, and you've got a tangata tiriti lens and approach. So for example, we have the 3 sets of pairs are mana whakahaere and governance. So the power and authority and obligations of tangata whenua to make decisions that maintain, protect, and sustain the health and well-being of freshwater and their relationship to freshwater. Whereas if you look at governance, it's the responsibility of all those with authority who are making decisions about freshwater, do so in a way that prioritizes the health and well-being of freshwater now into the future. Very similar outcomes when you look at it, but actually coming from 2 different viewpoints, 2 different lenses. And the same with kaitiakitanga and stewardship, obligation of tangata whenua to preserve, restore, enhance freshwater for now and for the future generations, and stewardship, obligation of all New Zealanders to manage freshwater in a way that it sustains the present and future generations. So again, quite complementary. And the exact same with manaakitanga, this process of showing care and respect, generosity for water and those who use water, and then same with care and respect, our responsibility is as New Zealanders, all New Zealanders, to care for freshwater and providing for the health of this nation. So very much complementary, and very much supporting, this ultimate holistic concept of Te Mana o Te Wai.
So Helen, do we have to change our whole mindset and stop thinking about water as a resource that supports our economy?
It's not as black and white as that, in my view. I mean, the economy is undisputably an important aspect in any thinking about any resource, including water. And while it's vitally important and it goes to the well-being of people and communities, the concept of Te Mana o Te Wai is all about the health of the water being paramount. So historically, particularly in the early days of the Resource Management Act, and up until relatively recently, probably we still see it a little bit now, but certainly up until 2014, you often saw the health of the water being traded off against economic outcomes. And there's been various changes made to both the overarching legislation, the Resource Management Act in this case, as well as the National Policy Statement to try and redress that imbalance. But I do think we need to be thinking about this in a way that it's not mutually exclusive. I mean, you can look at the economy and the health of the water together. And in fact, it's my view that that's exactly what Te Mana o Te Wai does. It's holistic. It considers or encompasses health and well-being of water, the health needs of people, and the ability of people and communities to provide for social, economic, and cultural well-being. So the economy is an important factor in this consideration. And in my view, Te Mana o Te Wai fundamentally includes this thinking about the economy and the needs of people and communities in relation to the economy or their economic needs. We've got to stop compartmentalising the way we think about, in my view, all natural resources, but we're talking about water at the moment. There's been a real tendency to compartmentalise as a way of achieving outcomes that otherwise wouldn't be able to be achieved if we're looking at everything holistically, because looking at everything in the round, not everything is going to win. There's always going to be aspects that aren't going to be achieved. And what the concept of Te Mana o Te Wai now means, that it is embedded in legislation, is that we have to ensure that we are not doing things that compromise the water's health. And that water's health is explained in more detail in the National Policy Statement, and also is required to be explained in more detail in regional plans, so that it's really ground truthed in real communities and with real people. I do think that a mindset change is required, because we have had a tendency to look at water as a free resource, in the sense that you might pay to actually physically extract it or physically put things into it, but you're not paying for the water itself, you're paying for the infrastructure that's achieving those objectives. So it's not really being valued in a way. It's almost, it's a free commodity that's included in economic kind of outcomes. So my thinking is that as we move through our freshwater and all water, actually, it's not just about freshwater management decisions, everything can exist together, but it will require a different way of thinking about it. And Troy touched on that when he talked about what it means for kind of the engineering community in terms of some of the traditional ways that things may have been done can actually be done quite differently. And there's some very innovative and environmentally friendly, for want of a better word, outcomes that should be considered. And those old-fashioned ways that we did things need to be discarded.
What needs to change to support Te Mana o Te Wai?
You can start this one, Troy.
I think the main thing that needs to change is change itself, I guess. Kind of changing the way we operate as water practitioners. But really, it's this workforce development, I think. It's around ensuring the workforce is trained up and around Te Mana o Te Wai, around Te Ao Māori concepts as well. I just have to look at my training as an engineer, and we actually didn't learn anything about Te Ao Māori as an engineer at the university. And my fear and concern is that those coming through is probably also the same through these universities. So really have to kind of integrate further, not just at this professional training level, but also to the undergraduate level as well, making sure that those coming through the ranks, have this training around implementing Te Mana o Te Wai and, knowing about Te Ao Māori values around water. The same thing could be said, with a lot of other engineers who have immigrated to New Zealand. I actually find that those who have immigrated tend to be the fastest to uptake Te Mana o Te Wai and kind of run with it. And that's kind of been quite, I guess, surprising to me compared to a lot of the more naturalized, well, not naturalized Kiwis, but those Kiwis who have been here for many generations. The other thing that needs to be changed is really widening our role and our responsibilities. Not just looking at the design aspect or the planning aspect, or the per se the amenity value or the landscape architecture, creating, but really kind of probably taking more of a nod actually from the landscape architects and creating places and not spaces. And the same with regards to water. So what I mean there is, one of the main things of Te Mana o Te Wai is engagement. Actually including communities, including tangata whenua and all the decision making and discussions around their waterways. Looking at a holistic approach as well, not just looking at things in isolation, maybe at a project level, but kind of zooming up, taking a bird's eye view, looking at a catchment level, having a look at perhaps a Te Kua Maui or Te Waipounamu level, and then going out to a Aotearoa level as well. The other thing that really needs to change, and going back to that workforce development, is around succession. We've got a big proportion of our water industry that's kind of top heavy and those who are, with a lot of experience and knowledge starting to think about retirement or are retiring. But then you've got an even bigger group of people coming through, the under 35s really, recent graduates to about, 10 or so years experience who have completely different understandings, and not just from a technical perspective, but also that kind of lived experience as, we've all grown in Aotearoa. But really, as the more technical people phase out, we need to be ensuring that knowledge is passed down, but also that knowledge is being passed up as well, because I really do believe that, and it is kind of a matter of fact, but, the new generations coming up are those that are going to be looking after our waterways for tomorrow.
Now, that's great, Troy. And, I like your focus on also talking about training. And so I'll make a bit of a plug here to, for the Water New Zealand cultural significance and importance of why module. And, one of the topics actually focuses on Te Mana o Te Wai. And you also spoke about, us needing to widen our role. And as we know, councils all around the country are up against huge pressures to develop. We know that the quality of our rivers, our groundwater, freshwater sources have been declining for decades. And that's a huge challenge to turn around. Are you optimistic that Te Mana o Te Wai will be able to address these massive issues?
Look, it's not Te Mana o Te Wai or anything we have introduced over the years in relation to freshwater management is not going to turn around the declining water quality by itself. It's going to take a much wider policy change, a mindset change that Troy talked about, and a concerted effort by everyone, central government, local government, industry groups, other stakeholders, our people and our communities, to actually ensure that we are able to achieve this over what will be a very long period of time. And to give you an example, when the Waikato River Authority was set up, and it has a vision and strategy around returning the health to the catchment, the very large catchment of that river, it's got an 80-year plan with milestones throughout that 80-year period. So it's multi-generational. Degradation has occurred over a long period of time. And unfortunately, the way many of our degraded water bodies hydrologically operate, that can often take significantly longer to fix the degradation than it took for that degradation to occur. So, but in my view, we don't have any choice. You know, it has to happen. We can't continue to allow our water bodies to continue to degrade. So we are, in my view, at a really important turning point. I do want to just add that I do think our local authorities are under a significant amount of pressure to facilitate development. We've seen a number of changes, including an announcement today regarding Auckland Council and the government's significant financial investment in Auckland Council's ability to develop its infrastructure to enable more housing to occur in the Auckland region. So those kinds of things can, if not done well, have a significant impact on our ability to ensure we're meeting the requirements that are embedded within Te Mana o Te Wai. So in itself, it will not prevent bad outcomes. It just won't. It's not the only answer. We have to start thinking about it as though it's just everyday stuff that we live and breathe, and it just makes sense to do. And as I mentioned before, in relation to the economy, until we start valuing water as part of all of the considerations we bring into the mix, it often will be, you know, used as a resource to be sucked dry, rather than used as a resource that meets all those holistic outcomes that we talked about before. So I do think we're seeing a shift. I know that in a relatively recent survey that was done in the last couple of years, good quality water is really important to most New Zealanders. That was really high on their priority list. And so I just can't see that we're going to get away with, or our politicians are going to get away with, a slip back into the old way of thinking.
I just wanted to follow on tautoko what Helen said, but, you know, optimistic, yeah, you have to be optimistic about this. A river, you know, started with one raindrop. You know, at the start of it, ultimately, if you go back, a river started from one raindrop. You know, and that little change in the environment led to, you know, streams and other tributaries going into a river, you know, and further out to the sea. And, you know, you take the Waikato, the Waipa as great examples, you know, of just how they came to be, really, and the force of them now, and the force of water, and a force to be recognized, a force that actually needs attention. It needs people to, you know, return to these waterways. It needs investment. We put more money and capital expenditure into our roads, you know, into power, into our houses, than we do with water. But, you know, one day we'll learn that you can't drink the road. You know, you can't wash yourself with a house. So we actually need to show the importance of water and actually really change this mindset. We actually have to start walking the walk and talking the talk as individuals, you know, and doing what we can to, you know, conserve water, treat it as a taonga, not waste it, not just send it down the toilets, you know, but actually looking at ways to capture it, reuse it, you know, and ultimately just conserve but also looking at waterways and protection. There's a huge investment at the moment around engaging with tangata whenua, and there's a lot of kōrero at the moment around co-governance, but actually needs a lot of people just to, I guess, pay attention or reconnect, offer some time to your, you know, to a local community to look at your waterways. practice at home with your water conservation. Look at your energy or your water efficiency.
Absolutely. We need to value and look after water. And, just your reference to the importance of engaging with tangata whenua, which is really, really important. Where do you see te mana o te wai in the future? What will it look like in Aotearoa, New Zealand in the next generation?
I hope it's not talked about, to be honest. And I mean that in a way that it's just business as usual. In a way that it's not still here. We don't still need this policy and this concept to look after water, but it's just business as usual.
That was Troy Brockbank, Water New Zealand board member, talking together with Water New Zealand's president, Helen Atkins. I'm Mumtaz Parker. Thanks for listening. Do remember to tune in for the next episode in our podcast series, Tāwara o Te Wai, Water Talk. Kia ora.